All right, let's talk about REST, or Representational State Transfer. If you've ever touched a web API, chances are you've used it. I mean, it is pretty much the most popular API style on the planet. But here's the thing. What does it actually mean when we say an API is RESTful? The answer might not be what you think. So I've got to ask you, for all the developers and architects out there, that API you just spent months building, the one you've been calling a RESTful API, is it really, truly RESTful? And you know what? The answer is probably no. But, and this is the important part, that is completely okay. In fact, you're in some really, really good company. By the end of this, you'll see why this isn't some mistake, but actually a very intentional, very smart design choice. To really get what's going on, we have to rewind the clock a bit. We got to go back to the source. The whole idea of REST was laid out by a guy named Roy Fielding in his Ph.D. dissertation way back in 2000. And this wasn't just a random collection of good ideas. It was a formal architectural style with super specific rules for building massive internet-scale applications. Fielding gave us 6 specific constraints that an architecture has to follow to be called REST. You've got the client-server separation, statelessness, cacheability, a layered system, and even this optional one, code on demand. But the one that causes all the arguments and all the confusion, the one that really separates a truly RESTful API from what most of us are building, is number 4, the universal infrastructure. The uniform interface is basically the heart of REST. The whole goal is to create one single, standard way for any client to talk to any server, period. It simplifies everything and makes sure everyone is speaking the same language. But this constraint has its own set of rules, and there's one in particular that just changes the whole game. And that brings us to maybe the most misunderstood and definitely the most rarely used piece of the entire REST puzzle, HEOES. HEOES. Yeah, I know, it's a mouthful. It stands for Hypermedia as the Engine of Application State, but the idea behind it is actually incredibly powerful. It means that a client should never have to guess what it can do next. Instead, the API's response itself contains all the possible actions in the form of links. So, for example, when you get an order from the API, the response doesn't just give you the order details, it also gives you the exact link you need to cancel it or check on its shipping status. And this right here, this is what it looks like in the real world. See that little links object in the JSON? That's the magic. The client doesn't need to read documentation to figure out the URL pattern for canceling an order. Nope, the server just hands it the link on a silver platter ready to go. This is what we mean by self-discoverability, and it's what allows a server to change and evolve over time without breaking all the clients that rely on it. So if this is the ideal, why does almost nobody do it? Well, it all boils down to one word: pragmatism. Let's be honest, building this stuff is complex. The server has to be smart enough to generate all these links on the fly based on the application state. And the client has to be smart enough to actually use them instead of just hitting hard-coded URLs. For most teams, the extra effort just doesn't pay off. And that reality, that trade-off, leads us to the kind of REST API that has completely taken over the industry. The one you're probably working on right now. We can call it pragmatic REST, or maybe a little more cheekily, restless. And listen, this isn't a bad thing at all. If you look at the APIs from the absolute giants, we're talking Google, Meta, you name it, they are almost all restless. They follow the really important REST principles like being stateless and having a client-server model, but they skip the whole Helios thing. Instead, they rely on good old-fashioned documentation to tell developers what to do. The industry has spoken, and it chose a simpler, more practical path.
This pragmatic approach still leans on the core pieces of how the web works, starting with the URI, the Uniform Resource Identifier. As you can see here, it's just a unique address for every single piece of information, or resource. It's simple, it's effective, and it's fundamental to everything we do online.
And here is the other key to pragmatic REST success: using the standard HTTP verbs to perform standard data operations, what we usually call CRUD. It's just so intuitive. You want to create something, you post it. You need to read it, you get it. Update it, put or patch. Get rid of it, delete. This mapping is clean, predictable, and frankly, one of REST's greatest strengths. So even without following every single rule from Fielding's original vision, this restless style is still the undisputed champion. Let's just quickly wrap up why that is. It's all about the trade-offs, right? The wins are huge. Because it's stateless, it can scale like crazy. It uses standard HTTP, so it can talk to basically any system out there. The number of tools and libraries that support it is just massive. And because it usually uses JSON, we humans can actually read it. Now, it's not perfect. You can run into problems with getting way too much data or not enough. And things like API versioning, well, you're pretty much on your own. But for so many projects, these trade-offs are a fantastic deal. So let's circle all the way back to that first question. Your API is almost certainly restless, but I hope you see now that this isn't a failure. It's a conscious design choice, a pragmatic decision that has been made by pretty much the entire industry. It's not a bug, it's a feature. So the real question isn't whether your API is perfectly restful anymore. The real question is, now that you have this clarity, what are you going to go design next?